The time is 21 minutes past 9 now. You're still tuned in into Salam Media with me, Silailo Makwidiri, with you from uh, 8 right until 10 every Wednesday on the Wednesday edition of News and Views. Now we shift focus to the Middle East on a conversation of significance. We're going to be delving into the recent statements from the Houthi group in Yemen, a resilient force standing against what they perceive as aggression from the United States and Britain in defiance of renewed airstrikes on the capital of Sana'a. The Houthi group has said this its determination to continue military action against Israel and to prevent vessels from transversing the Red Sea. Speaking to us about this is political analyst and activist Ayesha Kajee. Ayesha, salamu alaikum, and welcome to Salam Media. Just in a nutshell, the current state of affairs, what's currently happening in Yemen, what are the long-standing implications of it, and could we see something bigger brewing from,
Yeah,
both
wa alaikum,
actions of the Houthi group? Yes.
wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for having me on the show. Yemen's Houthi rebels have control of a large swathe of Yemen, including the very strategic located um, Bab el Mandeb, which is in the Strait of the Red Sea. And it's connected directly to the Suez Canal. So basically, attempts to stop Israeli ships or ships headed for Israel by the Houthis have been quite successful already and have resulted in the US and UK undertaking airstrikes against some of the Houthi missiles in the last week or so. Indeed, yesterday, a Greek owned ship, the Zographia, was hit by a Houthi missile because the Houthis said that this was actually on its way to Israel. Thus far, Israel has been fairly protected economically because it also has the ports of Haifa and Ashdod, which bring in goods through the Mediterranean Sea. But if this situation with the Houthis continues, the longer term impact and the impact in terms of international politics, geopolitics, and international trade will be significant.
Mm, definitely. I would like us maybe to touch a bit on that. I mean, the Houthi group, in a statement vowed that all American and British interests are now legitimate targets. What could be the
Yes.
potential consequences of such a declaration, and how, it might reshape the dynamics of the region?
Well, many analysts have said, firstly, the Houthis have declared that this aggression against ships passing to Israel or from Israel is a direct consequence of the current situation in Gaza. And
Mm,
they've said that until the aggression in Gaza is stopped, they will continue with this action. The response by the UK and the US, of course, has been pretty jingoistic in terms of their greater firepower, etc. But many analysts have said that this could lead to a regional war if it escalates. And of course, with the Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates aligning themselves quite clearly with Western imperialist interests. The potential for this to play out into a regional war, bringing in Iran and the militants, the Iranian-backed militants in both Iraq and Syria, could have devastating consequences not only for the region but for the world at large. The Qatari Prime Minister Sheikh Mohammed Al Thani said recently that the impact on liquid natural gas shipments alone, of which Qatar is a huge supplier of LNG, could be enormous. And he has said that repeated airstrikes by either side will solve nothing. There needs to be some communication, negotiation, some type of a reconciliation process.
mm, mm. I think with every action like this, depending on which side you're sitting on, you'd consider granted. But how effective have they been? in garnering international attention and support, for their cause. Israel and America are superpowers. One would consider the Houthi group small rebels. But do these actions have significant impact on the greater scale of things, and what's currently happening in Palestine?
Well, yes, on the greater scale of things, in terms of geopolitical trade alone globally, remember that if ships do not have access to the Red Sea and the Suez Canal, basically they then have to go all the way around South Africa, around the Cape of Good Hope,
Yeah.
which means an added 6,000 kilometers. So, in economic terms alone, that is an enormous cost and will push the price of goods up. Also, in diplomatic terms, in the medium to long term, as I said, recently the actions of the Houthis have not had that much impact on Israel in the short term, but already China's national carrier Costco has suspended exports to Israel via the Red Sea, and many of Israeli cars are made in China and come via that route. So that's going to be a significant medium to long term impact. And as I said, in the longer term, the impact for a regional war, a war with Iran and its proxies, as the US calls it, in Syria, in Lebanon, and in Yemen, should not, and in Iraq as well, should not be dismissed, because the potential for a regional war is actually quite high and escalating.
Mm, mm. Definitely. And I think the this kind of reaction is something that most people would have expected most countries in the Middle East to have. Can this maybe be some kind of a prompter for other Middle Eastern countries to kind of take tangible action against Israeli assets that are moving through them and in between the different countries?
Well, certainly those who see the genocide in Gaza being live streamed as we have, on a daily basis, one would assume that in the interests of solidarity with the Palestinians, that regional states would do so. However, it appears that the economic interests and diplomatic interests of, for example, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, etc., appear to trump the empathy for Palestinians in Gaza, particularly amongst the economic and political elites. What the people of those countries may say doesn't seem to be getting through to their rulers, who have clearly, as I said earlier, aligned themselves, unfortunately, with the Western imperialists in this case, that is, the United States and British governments, who have reacted to the Houthi actions and who will probably react far more aggressively in the event that any of the Houthi strikes on ships cause casualties. To date, although more than 30 ships have been targeted by the Houthis, there have been no fatalities. And that is actually something to be quite grateful for right now, because I do believe that the aggression will escalate exponentially should there be fatalities, particularly American or British fatalities, from a strike by the Houthis.
No, definitely. And just lastly, looking forward, how do you foresee the recent developments influencing the trajectory of the Israelis' aggression in Palestine, and also the conflict in Yemen itself, in terms of international involvement and potential diplomatic ties?
We've already seen the U.S. particularly, do a round of diplomatic trips. U.S. Secretary of State Blinken has been trying to drum up support in the region, amongst their own proxies, if you will, in the Middle East. And the outcome of that has been expected in the case of the UAE and Saudi Arabia, particularly, but has been less clear from other players in the region. So I expect that those diplomatic efforts will increase to allow the US to undertake more military actions from their air bases in the region. Also, if the situation in Yemen itself escalates, then the tensions between the current Yemeni state and the Houthis will also correspondingly escalate. So the civil war and the impact on Yemeni civilians could be quite huge. In terms of what Israel is doing in Gaza at the moment, my intuitive feeling, rather than my analytical feeling, is that Israel is going to do as much as it can. It is shameless. It is unrepentant about the genocide that it is currently carrying out in Gaza, which few can gainsay because, as I said, we've been seeing it happen in real time. So all Israel is going to do is it's going to escalate what it's doing in Gaza in the period between now and the expected ICJ interim ruling in the next few weeks. It's going to try and kill as many Gazans as possible. It's going to try and make life in Gaza more and more unlivable. And of course, it's going to correspondingly escalate the propaganda, the atrocity propaganda, and the victim, blaming. The Israelis have used classic victim blaming tendencies, and they're going to continue that both themselves and through the US and Western European allies, including now Germany, which has declared itself, a player in that, continue to ramp up the propaganda, the false propaganda that it is putting out there, that it is the victim, that it is a threat of genocide, etc., while continuing to actually carry out a genocide in Gaza.
Mm. Sure. Yeah, I think 2024 is going to be a really interesting year. Considering how it ended. Obviously, with that big ICJ case that South Africa presented. So, just lastly, what are some of things that you think we should be looking out for to going into the year? What are going to be those standout events, or if you particularly focusing on the crisis in Palestine, what should we be looking forward to going into 2024?
I think I think we should be looking forward to, well, not really looking forward, but unfortunately, what we're going to be seeing is
Yeah.
an escalation of the ethnic cleansing in the West Bank and an escalation of the genocide in Gaza. As I said, very unfortunately. Hopefully, side by side with that, we're going to be seeing an escalation in the global outrage and aid sent to Palestine, and pressure on the Israelis and their allies to halt the atrocities in Gaza. Whether that will actually come to pass quickly is the big question. A lot also depends on the speed with which the ICJ actually puts into place interim measures or provisional measures, as they call it in court terms. Those provisional measures are expected within the next few weeks. In terms of what Yemen is doing and what the Houthis are doing in Yemen, as I said, we probably can look forward to a shortage of both oil and liquid natural gas in the medium term, which will disrupt power or will cause power shortages in Western Europe, which may then place even more diplomatic pressure to bring about a ceasefire or a halting of military operations by Israel in Gaza and indeed in all of the occupied territories, including the West Bank and East Jerusalem. What we also may see, and I believe this has already started in the last few days, we've seen that the Houthis have expanded their operations beyond the Red Sea itself into the Gulf of Aden, which is on Yemen's southern coast, And I think we can see, and we can probably foresee an escalation in that region, which will seriously impact other shipping routes, including in the Horn of Africa. And if
Mm.
that occurs, we may see a sort of involvement in this escalation by countries in the Horn, in the Gulf of Aden, including Somalia, Eritrea, Somaliland, etc. So the geopolitical impacts, both at a political level and an economic level, could be quite severe indeed in the coming year.
Mm. Yeah, Aisha Kajee there, painting a really grim picture in the geopolitical landscape for 2024. But thank you so much for giving us insights. We'll definitely keep an eye on all the things that you've mentioned. And thank you so much for giving us your time. And I hope we'll chat soon in the nearby future.
Shukran jazilan. Thank you very much for having me. And I apologize for cutting into you. I couldn't hear you very well at that point.
No problem at all. Thank you. I appreciate your time.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
There you have it, political analyst Ayesha Kajee there giving us insight on the Houthi group's, really solid reaction to the atrocities by the Israeli, well, occupiers in Palestine there, and making sure that at least, unlike most of the Middle Eastern countries, they, forward with their solidarity with the people of Palestine, and bringing tangible action to the atrocities that are currently happening in that side of the world. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll be chatting to Ashraf Gangrika from Africa Muslim Agency. They are launching the Amman School of Excellence in Finetown. This is a group of schools that they have been launching all across South Africa and in some parts of the Middle East. He's going to be chatting to us about that, and what you can expect and how you can get involved in building these schools, and what they are all about. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're speaking to AMA.